Bienvenue. Good afternoon and welcome to what we will believe is an engaging session on Canada's evolving payment needs and building a more efficient payment system for industry. That's a mouthful. We're so glad that you're here, and thank you to the IPBC for giving us this time today. My name is Marilyn Benninger, and it's been my pleasure to be your facilitator for today's session, getting all of our wonderful guests ready for an engaging afternoon. The format for our time together will be this. Each panelist will provide an overview of the Canadian payment system from their unique perspective. And then I will lead a discussion period, followed by some time for your direct questions and answers to the panel. Our goal for today's session is to provide IPBC members with the opportunity to engage and hear about the priorities of the stakeholders in the payment system, and perhaps gain a new knowledge about how electronic payments move through our system. I have the honor of serving on the board of directors for Telpay, and I'm often asked by our customers, bookkeepers, and accountants about certain aspects of our service. They often don't understand things like why it takes so long for some kinds of transactions. By the end of our time together, we hope that you'll leave with an additional knowledge base that you can share with your clients about exactly why it takes as long as it does, and why modernization of the payment system is absolutely a priority for the panelists that you're going to meet today. First, a bit of housekeeping. Where you're sitting, you'll see a survey. We're going to ask you to please complete that before the end of the session, or if you prefer, you can drop by our booth and provide your feedback. We're going to put all that feedback together and forward it on to the Department of Finance as part of their consultation process in regards to overhauling the retail payments oversight framework. That's another big mouthful. It's about how money moves through our system for business. So let me tell you a little bit about the way the Canadian payments is working now, the current state of Canadian payments. A wonderful study, I encourage you to read it, the C.D. Howe Institute's study, Money in Motion, Modernizing Canada's Payment System. Did you know that Canadians write about 800 million paper checks a year? Businesses are about 46% of that volume, and consumers about 42%. The rest falls to government. And while check use has been declining for the last 3 to 5 years, and about 5% per year on average in the past decade, it's estimated that businesses could save between 1.6 billion and up to 4.4 billion in 1 year by writing as many as 350 million fewer checks. Put all that money back into our economy in the hands of business owners. The C.D. Howe report was clear. There have been tremendous advances in information technology that allow for payment systems that are faster, cheaper, and better able to meet our users' demands. But it's time for the Canadian system to play catch-up with the rest of the world. Before I introduce our panel members, I'd like to take one moment and ask for your help in acknowledging a pioneer in our industry, a leader and a visionary, and that would be the founder of our company, Mr. Bill Lavin. Bill, where are you? There you are in the back. You'll have the chance to hear from Bill a little bit later in our presentation. If you've not met him personally, I encourage you to do so. We are very proud of our founder. He wears a pin here, which is the Order of Canada, which was bestowed upon him for his philanthropic work. So we're very proud of our founder, and I hope that you have a chance to meet him today. So the panelists that you're going to be meeting today, and thank you so much for your time in preparing this very engaging session, are at the forefront of the changes that are already underway to modernize Canada's payment system. So let me introduce them to you from my side. First, we have Dan Kelly, President and CEO, Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thank you, Dan, for being here. Next is Janet Lalonde, Director of Modernization from Payments Canada. Thank you so much. And finally, John Zajac, Vice President of Trust Operations from within Telpay. We regrettably have missed someone today. we had a person here that was going to be from the Department of Finance to speak about oversight and the regulations and ask for your feedback in the consultation process. But regrettably, his flight from Ottawa was canceled not once, but twice. So we weren't able to bring him to you today. But we do thank you for your time. We're not going to talk an awful lot about TELPay. We're going to talk about a system that affects all of us, and that would be the Canadian payments system that we rely on. So I'm going to ask John Zajac to come up first.
Good afternoon and welcome. As a stakeholder, TELPay has an interest in modernizing the Canadian payment system. We process over $17.7 billion annually in payments. We have over 100,000 plus biller lists, which is Canada's largest. We're servicing over 12,000 businesses and financial institutions. As an established and trusted participant in the Canadian payment space for over 32 years, we offer a comprehensive all-in-one bill payment, payroll, collection, US dollar, and international payment system. So payment system improvements are very meaningful to us, important to us, and our customers. Different payment methods score differently on the above characteristics. Checks would score relatively low relative to electronic payment methods. The cost to issue a check is estimated by Scotiabank to be between $9 and $25. Other methods are equally costly. Wires can cost upwards of $40 per payment, and credit cards can cost recipients 2.5% of the value of the transaction. Automated funds transfer, or AFT, is significantly cheaper. The issuing and clearing of a check could take over a week. Electronic systems are much quicker. But yet today, as Marilyn mentioned, over 876 million checks are still issued in Canada every year. And Marilyn also made reference to the C.D. Howe Institute study, which said that reducing or eliminating checks and moving to completely electronic payments, Canada could see an increase in productivity of 2%. So we're not talking about something insignificant in the overall economy and our lives. So with some improvements to, or in the Canadian payment system, AFT would more quickly become the preferred payment method for Canadian businesses. So why do we hold on to checks? Payment service providers are partly to blame. We need to serve the needs of businesses better than we do now. But most of the changes need to be made by the payment system itself. Three key areas of improvements that we advocate for are faster payment processing, oversight of funds held by payment service providers, and a more user-oriented payment system. Now, this all can be achieved relatively easy with the changes that are currently being made by Payments Canada, as well as being considered by the Department of Finance. So let's talk about one of the items first, quicker notification of returned items. Quicker notification is important for all payments, but especially for payroll processing. TELPay, for example, offers two methods for customers to fund their payments. Funds can be pushed for next day payment. But when TELPay is debiting your account, to ensure it has good funds, it holds a debit between 3 and 4 business days. So let's take a look at what that kind of looks like. So on Monday, we would initiate the debit. That gets processed at the close of business. It's received by a bank, and their window to make a decision to pay or not pay that debit begins on Tuesday. Now, they have 24 hours to make that decision, which takes us into Wednesday. Now then, the receiving financial institution then notifies the originator, our bank, whether the payment is good or not, and the next day we receive notification. So there you have that long window of 4 days that if we're debiting an account, it seems like forever until the payment's made. Now this 4 days could be reduced as quickly as same-day notification of returned items, reducing hold times. This would help keep funds in customers' accounts long as possible. Quicker notification is possible if the debit or credit record contained a faster mechanism to notify the originator of the returned item. Next, we'll move along to moving funds through the system. Currently, payment processors like Telpay have two opportunities to push payments into the clearing system. The windows are once in the morning and once in late afternoon. Faster processing of payments would require increased frequency of exchanges between banks, so sending more opportunities for us to send transactions to financial institutions. Extending the exchange well into the evening so that the day's payments can reach its destination prior to banks' cutoff times. And possibly more operating days for the Canadian payment systems, maybe even the weekend. Sorry, Jack. Providing these changes would be the equivalent of injecting billions of dollars of capital into businesses of all sizes instead of sitting inefficiently in the hands of payment service providers like us. Next, I'll talk about oversight and transparency. Today, users are confronted with a buffet of payment service providers, but no uniform standard that they can rely on to assess them. I think you've all probably done the walk down the hall. There's numerous payment service providers out there, but oddly enough, there's no common regulatory framework for you as users to be able to assess them. So payment service providers must be able to account to their customers and to the Canadian Depository Insurance Corporation for the funds it handles. Customers and regulators should know that the trust funds that they have on deposit match trust liabilities at the end of the day. Requiring an independent auditor to report to a regulatory body would add little, if any, cost to a payment service provider like us. Telpay, in fact, has been providing such guarantees and self-imposed oversight for decades. An oversight framework could also include required mandatory of trust accounts to keep funds segregated and safe, identification and registration of industry participants, and reserve requirements to deal with any unforeseen events. Next, I'll talk about quickly creating a user-oriented payment system. With additional oversight as we proposed, the landscape between banks and payment service providers would become a bit more level. However, payment service providers would still be disadvantaged when it comes to access to the Canadian clearing system. Further parity could be accomplished in two ways. A system to validate account ownership is one way. Knowing that you are debiting and sending funds to the correct bank account would speed up setup of bill payers and billers. Current methods are manual and expose the system and participants to fraud and time delays. A simple solution would be to provide payment service providers with a method that generates a response to the sender validating the account ownership. Secondly, is the ability for payment service providers like us to send transactions directly into the payment system. Countries like, or areas like the European zone, the UK, Australia are all examples of jurisdictions that are introducing or investigating a concept called open banking. And this is to level the playing field between financial institutions and industry participants, payment service providers. Oversight combined with improved access, faster payments would help level the playing field and allow all to provide innovative payment solutions to Canadian businesses. So I'll close with saying that the Canadian payment system belongs to all Canadians. It belongs to me, the panelists, all of you in the room, your customers. And a vibrant, efficient, and competitive and secure system benefits us all. All payment participants, though, need and should be given equal consideration. A financial institution's needs are very different than a small business's needs, or even a payment service provider's needs. So as policymakers go through this process of modernizing the payment system in Canada, it is important to provide your opinions and feedbacks to the architects and trustees of these systems, Payments Canada, the Department of Finance, and perhaps even your service provider like Telpay. And that's it.
So that's the world that we live in. We live in a constrained world full of some inefficiencies that have been with us for decades. And there is modernization happening within the infrastructure. We wanted to bring that to your attention, and we are at the forefront of providing recommendations on your behalf, not only for our needs, but for the needs of our customers and for the industry. And Mr. Lavin has sat on what was previous to Payments Canada. The Canadian Payments Association has sat on that board and has been a contributor to the standardization of which we hold ourselves. And yeah, I hope you understand that there is no standardization across the industry, but that it needs to come. We need to protect consumers and all of our payment system. So, in that regard, it's my pleasure to bring Dan from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. He speaks on behalf of lots of different businesses and has a perspective as well. Please help me welcome Dan.
Thank you so much. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I am really pleased whenever I get a chance to talk to people in your industry, in that you are not only, many of you, small and medium-sized businesses yourselves, but you also serve small and medium-sized businesses, and of course, as you may know, many of them are members of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Just by way of background, CFIB has 109,000 small and medium-sized firms as members, spread from coast to coast. Our members are in all sectors of the economy. We're a nonpartisan lobby group, and our primary goal is to, of course, ensure that governments hear the voices of small and medium-sized firms. So while I love speaking about payments, in the last few weeks I've spoken about almost nothing other than some of the tax rules that our Minister of Finance has been proposing. We have been part of a 75-member, as of today, coalition of business associations fighting those changes, and CFIB has certainly been at the center of the fight. If you want to follow my Twitter following at CFIB, you'll see a little taste of that from time to time. I'm also really, really happy to be here today, especially at the invitation of Telpay. I'm a Winnipegger, and anytime a terrific Winnipeg-based company like Telpay gives us a call, we're happy to provide. We have a lot of experience on payments. We have been at the forefront of another battle, also involving the Department of Finance, but it's been a battle over the payment side of the equation with respect to credit cards. I'm sure many of your clients have been in the same space as our members, generally speaking, and that is just being incredibly frustrated over the past decade or so since the advent of premium credit cards, where the cost to accept credit card payments just started rising rapidly with no information and really no regard for small and medium-sized firms that were forced to accept them. We've collected a lot of data about this over that period of time. Of course, credit card payments are only one form of electronic payment, but an important one. I want to share with you a little bit of data that we've collected from our members, both some data on how members prefer to be paid and how they prefer to pay. This is data collected from CFIB's small and medium-sized business members. It often surprises people, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, that small firms really still love to be paid and to pay by check. We represent at CFIB an awful lot of business-to-business members, firms that are in that space. And of course, if you're transferring large sums of money, check is still a very, very popular way to do that, the number one most popular way according to our members. And this often surprises people. When you break that down, though, for the retail and hospitality sector, of course, that is a little bit different. In those sectors, they do prefer things like credit cards and debit cards, despite the cost, just to keep checks, to keep their cashiers moving. That is a little bit more popular on that front. But when we exclude retail and hospitality, the numbers are even higher in terms of those that do prefer checks. And people often ask me, why? Why do small firms, I'm sure you know the answer to this, but why do small firms still like checks after all these new alternatives have been built or in the process of being built? For one, it is, of course, the cost, potentially, perhaps the perceived lower cost, but the cost nonetheless of receiving a check, of clearing a check, of writing a check, is often viewed by small firms as one of their chief advantages. The other thing, of course, that we can't forget is that for the Canada Revenue Agency, a canceled check is often viewed as a fairly consequential way to demonstrate a transaction, and credit card statements and things like that don't always, by CRA, get held to the same level of esteem. When we look at how our members like to pay other suppliers, check is very popular on that front. Although I do note that credit card payments, more and more business owners wish to pay with credit cards, just like consumers, because they too have been part of the fairly unhealthy points addiction that seems to be plaguing many in Canada. So that has been one feature that we have to keep in mind. When we think about, though, how we might be able to get more small firms looking at electronic payments as an option for their business, we asked about some of the obstacles to do that. And the chief obstacle for small and medium-sized firms was the cost, that they felt that the cost of implementing a system to do that was not going to justify the investment that they were going to have to put in place. More said that, others said that this was not a common type of payment in their industry or sector, and others said that they just didn't wish to change their business practices at all. Of course, there's lots of good reasons, though, to get off of checks, to encourage small and medium-sized firms to get off of checks, but we have to do it in a smart way, and we have to do it in a way that is not going to cause stress and dislocation for small and medium-sized businesses. Looking at obstacles in another way, when making payments for those wishing to pay others electronically, there's similar answers. The other party may not be set up to accept electronic payments. They don't want to make changes. They're concerned about online security, or it's just not common in their industry or sector. I think, though, that there is something that we often don't talk an awful lot about that does factor into this as well, though, and that is with respect to trust. And I have to say, while there are some very trustworthy companies in the electronics payment space, and our host is certainly one of them, there have been a lot of bad things happen as well. And when I think about the rollout of premium credit cards and some of the practices of some of the credit card processing companies, it has left a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of small and medium-sized firms. They are worried about some of these players. There were some incredibly duplicitous tactics that were being used by electronic payments providers, trying to trick small businesses into terrible contracts that were seeing premium charges on absolutely everything that moves. If you sneezed while you're walking by the payments machine, you got an extra charge for that. And I do think that has caused some erosion of trust in the payment space that we have to talk about and we have to accept is there. And we at CFIB have worked. I think that there's been a lot of cleaning up of a lot of the bad practices over the last couple of years. I haven't had a member break into tears with me over the phone on this front. But my goodness, for many, many years, this was almost the number one thing that owners wanted to talk to CFIB about, was the high cost of accepting credit cards and the terrible practices that many in the industry were using. With respect to future innovation, some of our recommendations on this front, we obviously want to make sure that costs are kept in reasonable check. Sorry to use the word check in that instance, but costs are kept down on this front. That is very important for a lot of small firms. That small businesses in particular just can't afford huge setup costs or per transaction costs in making their payments. That online banking and mobile services will be, of course, coming on stream in more and more instances, but those costs are often quite high. If a business wants to set themselves up to take payments from through the banking system, they often have to separately register with every bank and pay fees, monthly fees, and registration fees to do that. Of course, some of the innovations that are happening provide some great opportunities, also some enhanced risks for them, but we've wanted to make sure that the industry is ready before we start to remove checks from the environment. And there are many that are suggesting that we need to speed that up, to pull checks out of the system, to force businesses to use some of these other alternatives. We at CFIB see it a little differently. We need to build these alternatives, make sure that they are working well, and make sure that they are doing so at a low cost. And then I think businesses will start to use them and we can start to pull back from the world of paper checks. And of course, one of the things that we've made very clear is that the CRA really needs to keep up. If we're going to be doing some of this, we need to make sure that business owners have the confidence that their records are going to be accepted for audit purposes in the same way that perhaps some of their paper records are today. We've put together some principles of what this could look like, making this affordable, obviously principle number one, ensuring a secure payment system, making sure that it truly is user-friendly, and thinking about this from a small business lens, making sure that they have access, and as I said before, making sure that we build trust between SMEs and some of the other players in the payment system. So lots of opportunities. I think that we want to make sure that that Canada remains in many ways, as we have on some fronts with respect to debit, for example, on the leading edge. But we also have to do it in a careful way, and we have to keep costs down as we go. Thank you so much.
I've been involved with Telpay for the best part of a decade, and preparing for this session for you has been enlightening. To know that the payment system affects all of us, but that each of these esteemed panelists are here operating on our behalf with trust and confidence to bring us to a more efficient and modern system, in keeping with the rest of the world, quite frankly. So here to bring us up to date in solving that problem, Janet Lalonde, the Director of Modernization. That falls to you, Janet, if I could get you to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. Oops. There we go. All right, so I thought that I would start off just by giving a little bit of background about who Payments Canada is and a little bit about our role in the payments ecosystem. I know, as much as I think we should be, I know that we're not a household name. So just a little bit of level setting. I think Marilyn mentioned earlier that we formerly went by the name Canadian Payments Association, so some of you may better recognize that name, but we now refer to ourselves as Payments Canada. And really, we operate the core clearing and settlement systems that allow the Canadian economy to function. Billions of dollars every day are exchanged through the systems that Payments Canada operates. $3 million a second, actually, if you want to drill it down. But in addition to being a system operator and a rule setter, we also have a really important role as a connector and a collaborator and a facilitator in the industry. And we also have a duty to safeguard the payment system in Canada and ensure that it meets the needs of users of the payment system. So it's really through that role that we are seeking to modernize the payment system in Canada. And payment system modernization is really not just about making system upgrades, although it is that as well. But it's about creating a platform for innovation for payments in Canada. So why are we modernizing? What are the drivers for modernization in Canada? And really, the payments landscape is changing, not only in Canada, but around the world. There's new technologies. Those new technologies are driving evolving customer needs and demands, higher expectations, increased expectations. We're also dealing with a changing regulatory environment. There's increased regulation on financial institutions and other participants in the system. So we need to enhance our systems to comply with those new safety and security requirements. And we also want to ensure that new players in the ecosystem have fair risk-based access to the payment system as well. When we were developing the vision for payments modernization in Canada, we talked to hundreds of organizations across the country. And what we really heard loud and clear was really, we summed it up into 8 basic needs that Canadians are looking for with respect to the payment system. And some of those would probably be near and dear to your hearts as well, but people want faster. They want their payments faster. They want their payments to be easier to make. They want their payments to be more transparent. So when you send a payment, it doesn't go into a black hole somewhere. You can see where it is along the journey and know when it's going to get there. there. Canadians want the ability to innovate on a payments platform and offer maybe new services out to customers. And lastly, there's increased demand for access to the payment system, and making sure that increased access to the payment system, if it's outside of the financial institution world, comes with really good and fair risk-based access and oversight so that we're not creating risk. So what is the plan for modernization? So overall, the plan involves, first of all, replacing our core clearing and settlement infrastructure. So this is really made up of two main systems in Canada. There's our LVTS system, which is our wire transfer system in Canada. We are fully replacing that system. It's going to be called Lynx, and it will be a world-class, resilient RTGS modeled system. So that's a fully collateralized real-time gross settlement system. We're also going to be replacing our retail, what we call now the ACSS, or Automated Clearing and Settlement System, with a new system that will also provide additional collateralization and new features for participants. One of the other exciting things that we're going to be doing is introducing a real-time capability in Canada. So what this means is that there will be a real-time rail that will have the ability to send near real-time or near instant credit transfer messages. And companies and financial institutions will be able to build overlay services on top of that rail to offer unique and exciting services out to the market. And then another thing that we're doing is some of the previous speakers spoke quite a bit about our current electronic batch system, AFT, in Canada, that really handles quite a large number of electronic payments, both direct deposit and pre-authorized debit payments. And we believe that even with these other enhancements that we're making in the payment system to introduce a real-time capability, that batch is a really important element of the payments ecosystem that will live on, and there's a true need for batch. So what we want to do is introduce some enhancements to our batch system as well, which we're going to be doing over a couple of phases of work. And all of this is going to be underpinned by a modern rules framework and probably even more importantly, ISO 20022 payment messaging. So we're going to be our new real-time rail as well as our high-value system and the batch system will be ISO enabled in the future. So I wanted to take a minute maybe just to talk about ISO. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's a really important enhancement to the payment system because it's going to drive quite a bit of economic benefit and the ability to sorry, I should start by saying that for those of you that don't know, ISO 20022 is an international payment standard. It's a data standard. Right now in Canada, our batch system and our high-value system and also EDI use different standards, so there's not a lot of interoperability between those standards. And also one of the big limitations of those standards is that they don't have the ability to carry a great deal of remittance information with you, so with the payment, sorry. So this is really one of the biggest barriers to getting rid of checks, that this ability to carry remittance information with the payment doesn't exist right now. So when we bring ISO, in particular when we bring ISO to the batch system, what this means is that there will be room for unlimited amounts of remittance information with your payments, and this will provide opportunities for better automation in your accounts receivable and accounts payable systems and provide a great deal of benefit in that way. And I guess reflecting on our system changes in general, the benefits don't only accrue as a result of implementing ISO 20022, but I talked a little bit already about some of the benefits, I think, of the real-time capability and the new core clearing and settlement system. But what I really wanted to focus on here is the changes that we're making to our batch system, because I think those will be very meaningful to the audience. What we're doing in the batch system is we're introducing a third payment exchange, inter-FI payment exchange, and we're doing that as of September of 2018. And that third payment exchange is going to be introduced at 9 o'clock in the evening, and that's going to bring a tremendous benefit to Canada, because right now our last inter-FI payment exchange happens at 4:30 p.m., which is 1:30 p.m. on the West Coast. So that means that businesses and financial institutions in British Columbia really have to wrap up their business day by around noon, and they aren't able to exchange any more payments. So by extending out that inter-FI deadline to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, it affords businesses in Western Canada the ability to send those payments later in their day. One of the other enhancements that we're adding also in 2018 is that we're requiring, right now our AFT system is a next day system. Payments get exchanged on day one, value gets provided to the beneficiary by opening of business the next day. So we're moving that up and requiring, under our rules, that financial institutions that receive payments, credit payments in any of those three exchanges, have to provide funds availability to the beneficiary. It's okay. Have to provide funds availability to the beneficiary within 2 hours. Same day. So that's a really big benefit as well. And then we'll be introducing a further wave of changes to AFT in the future, and that will include the introduction of ISO 20022 and potentially adding even further payment exchanges, so that, for example, we think that there would be real benefit in having another payment exchange that would occur midday. Having another midday payment exchange will allow companies to receive money and then actually have the opportunity to turn around and do something with it on the same day. So that is my really quick summary, but if you want to get more information, you can go to our website, payments.ca/modernization, because there's a whole wealth of information there about the Payments Modernization Project. And if you're even more interested in that, I would encourage you to consider attending our annual conference that we're holding in Toronto called the Payments Canada Summit, and that's going to be from May 9th to the 11th in 2018.
Did it surprise you to hear that we can't process your payments because we can't process your payments? It's not that we don't want to. The system won't bear that burden. So I'd like to, because we have lost the opportunity to hear directly from the Department of Finance, and we regret not being able to bring that message to you, just a couple of minutes, if our founder, please, Bill, if you wouldn't mind coming forward. Bill started this company in 1985. And people ask me, well, why is it called Telpay? Well, it's called Telpay because that man over there invented telephone banking. And it doesn't sound very revolutionary, but when you consider that a phone is an electronic device that's attached to a wall and has a keypad, it becomes the grandchild of what we all know as electronic banking. So please help me welcome Mr. Bill Levin.
Thanks, Marilyn, and thanks to all of the panelists. That very much appreciate your being here and helping us inform people about an item that passes examination most of the time, because for just about everybody, your bank service charges aren't all that much. You know, it's a little item in your expense file. But to the people that are running it, of course, there's 2 or 3 million of you. There's only about 5 or 6 of them, and so those little payments can mount up to quite a chunk to those other people, the other 5 or 6. So actually, I've been involved in payments since 1968. When we started. I started ComCheck payroll service, and a key part of that service was that we not only did the payroll, but we drew the paychecks that were given to the employees on a single bank account, so that to get set up and use our service, you didn't have to buy checks, you didn't have to sign checks, you didn't have to clear checks. It was quite a change in the way of handling payrolls at that time. So, and of course that's common now. But I mention that because, you know, the payment system has been of interest to me and the companies I've been involved with since 1968, and I guess you could say even before that. And we've had our bouts and differences and so on, believe it or not. If you can imagine deciding to take on the Royal Bank when you had revenues of under $1 million yourself, or and we had to do that twice with the Royal Bank, although the second time we were a little bit stronger. But the payment system to us is very key to what we can do for you. And what's coming ahead for us is going to greatly change what we can do for you. It may not sound like much individually, but just this issue of returned items. We have to hold back everybody's funds, every single customer's funds, before we can pay them, until we're sure that they are going to clear the banking system. Almost all of them do clear the banking system, but because there's the odd one and our fees are fairly low, we have to hold back all of them. The result is that probably, if you include the payroll companies, I don't have the real figure, but I'm sure it's over $2 billion. If the government or the tax assessor or whoever it is were to say, we're going to inject $2 billion of free cash into every business in Canada in total, everybody would open their eyes. And so that I think is what is going to happen as the payment system evolves. So it's something that you need to be aware of and help encourage happen. Just think of payroll funding itself. Right now, if you've got to wait 4 days in order to have your payroll paid, 4 days after you present the funds to somebody like Telpay, that gets very difficult. Even to know the amount of your payroll 4 days before payroll payday can be difficult. But to provide the money 4 days ahead of time can be even more difficult. With the changes being suggested here today, you'd be able to run your payroll first thing in the morning, send the funds sometime during the afternoon, sometime before 9 o'clock at night. We would submit your transactions before midnight or just after midnight, dated today though. Your transactions would be presented to the banking system, and your employees would have their pay the next morning. So that's the kind of change. Yeah, you know, as I say, I started ComCheck many years ago, so I think I know a little bit about handling of payroll and the timing of payroll and the difficulty of getting the time cards in, getting everything all added up from last week to say Monday or Tuesday and having it all done by Tuesday so you can pay on Friday, that's a challenge. If you could have another extra couple of days to do your payroll, it'll be more accurate. You'll have the funds or be able to build funds until Thursday or Friday. And finally, you'll get your employees paid within less than 24 hours of the time you present your payroll. So that alone is worth your attention here. And I guess I'd like to end by encouraging you to let your feelings be known to the Department of Finance and to Payments Canada. I've found that politicians especially, and your MP and MLAs and so on, politicians especially are responsive to personal information. I would say that the Department of Finance is also very responsive. Payments Canada has kind of two masters. One of them, and the one that pays the bills, is the banks. So that's, and I have to say that when I have to study the rules that they have to make, they do a marvelous job. But they're still responding to those 5 or 6 banks and not necessarily to you. It's difficult for them to find out what you need. It's easy for them to find out what the banks need. And so I encourage you to do that, to let anybody involved in government and payment systems know what you want from a payment system. Thanks very much.
Take my papers. Take my papers. Thank you so much. Bill will be here at the conference for a little bit. His a 6 o'clock flight, so if you have a chance, please avail yourself of the privilege of spending some time with this remarkable man that we are so proud of. So, we're just a little past 2:30. I'd like to have a couple of questions directed to the panel and then leave you some time for your direct questions if you have them. We are recording this session for you and for those who weren't able to join, because lots of choices here at the conference. And it will be on our website, we expect tomorrow, but certainly before the end of the conference. And the links that we're talking about with Department of Finance and others will also be there. So spread the word. So a number of questions while we were preparing. Maybe first to Janet. When you look across the globe, what do you feel in terms of other countries? Where do we benchmark ourselves, and where do we see efficiencies and good examples for Canada to follow?
Well, certainly when we were developing our vision for modernization in Canada, and our roadmap consultation played a very, very important role in that. And part of our consultation wasn't just domestic. We looked outside of Canada to see what was happening in other jurisdictions. And we actually, during that process, we spoke with 27 other countries that are undergoing some sort of transformational journey similar to what is happening now in Canada. And I think that, every country is tackling it maybe a little bit differently than we are. And I think I'd like to say that we're doing it right. And we're certainly benefiting from some of the lessons learned in other countries, some countries like the UK, Australia, Japan, in particular. But one thing I think is important to note is that, they all come from, these are different countries. They have differing public policies that they need to incorporate into their modernized systems. But one thing that seems to be, that we see across the board from those countries is that they've all adopted a holistic multi-system approach that's really focused on end user benefit and making sure that as an end user of the payment system, it really shouldn't matter how your payment is being transmitted between two banks. You're making a payment for a specific business purpose, and you need to get your money there by X. and you need a certain amount of guarantee that the funds aren't going to come back. And those are the characteristics that you need for your business payment, and that how that travels and what rails that happens over is really, it's not maybe the most important part.
Thank you. Dan, a question for you. An IPBC member, some of this information may be news to them. What would you suggest to our audience? How could they make influences, enhancements, and how would they get that word out to their clients? And what should the key takeaway be to small businesses?
Well, one is I think that, as I talked about, trust being such an important factor. There's a lot of discussion right now about fintechs and there's all sorts of new entrants and players coming into the marketplace. Some of them I think show great potential. Others, I have to admit, I have some worries about in terms of their presence. We have seen among some of them some of the rates that they're charging on loans to kind of be in the payday lending categories. So I guess the best advice is to move forward, but move forward cautiously, and to also look at some of the names that you trust. Look at some of the platforms, do some investigation work, and make sure that you're making wise decisions in choosing a payments player. I think we do want to make sure that the market is open for others to come in and to mess things up a bit. I think that that's a good thing. We need more competition, not less. At the same time, there is going to be, whenever there is, some new players coming into a marketplace, as there is in this one, there will be some that are not going to be doing what they say they're going to be doing, and that's why I think it's very important that Payments Canada obviously has an important role on this front, as does government more broadly.
Thank you.
And I'd like to just add to that point. This kind of ties into the panel member that's not present, Department of Finance and UG. Both Dan and myself sit on a FinPay committee, which is looking at an oversight framework for the industry. And much to Dan's concerns for members about safety, security, and kind of tread cautiously. And I think that's the overall intent of the FinPay discussions and the consultation paper that was released early in, I guess, July, and submissions are being taken up to October 6th, I believe, to build that framework. So you as a user can look at a payment service provider and know that they kind of have like a stamp of approval, and that there's certain measures and certain things that they are being required to do that hold up to a standard. And I think that's important to achieve that confidence.
Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left. I certainly want to give you the time for your voice. Is there anyone that has a direct question? Yes.
I don't know, to any of the panelists, really, can you comment on the possibility of having something like they're doing in the UK with the sandbox, where you allow fintech companies to come in and access these systems with kind of limited regulatory until they have proof of concept?
So your question, if I might paraphrase, is will there be a sandbox, a testing area, a place for the new regulatory, the providers, consumers to engage before it is rolled out live? Is that an accurate assessment of your question? A little hard for me to hear.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good question for me to take, and I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. That's exactly the kind of engagement that Payments Canada is looking to have in the industry. Because we want our modernized systems to be more open and have broader access. It's really important for us to collaborate and engage with new players now, and I think a really perfect example of that is our recent proof of concept that we did using blockchain to replicate a high value clearing and settlement system, and that was all completely done in a sandbox type environment. And we're definitely open to other ideas to do similar type experiments in the future. Yeah.
Yes, Kim.
I've learned through some other education opportunities that I've had recently that Canada is sort of mediocre or on the lower end of the scale of how advanced we are in our payment
So let me just summarize that so that it gets picked up by video. Yeah, so your comment is that in other settings similar to this, it was revealed that potentially Canada's payment system is not as modernized as others that we could live up to. And your question is, what has been the impediment? What has taken us this long, and how do we turn that around? Go ahead.
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think on certain aspects of in the payments area, Canada does very well and is ahead of the game. I think of debit, for example, with our Interact system that is well trusted, and debit use in Canada is quite high relative to some other countries in the world, certainly compared to the United States. So that I think is a trusted part. The part that and the subject I think that we were talking about today, the B2B side of things, I do think Canada is quite behind from all indications. So we don't have those kinds of well-developed, ubiquitous solutions that others can plug into to make those kinds of seamless transactions. We have some players, important players in that space, but it's certainly not. I think in the same realm as exists elsewhere in the world when you're moving large volumes, when you're large for small business standards, I guess, but when you're paying a contractor, $20,000, or you're buying some supplies, that's the area I think that Canada is a little bit behind. There are some good players, but there's not that national infrastructure that we think is needed, and that's obviously an important part of what's being worked on today.
Thank you for your question. Did you have anything to add before I wrap us up?
No, I agree with the comments that Dan made, and I guess just to say that we I think that to a certain extent your comment is valid. I don't think that we're quite as far behind as all that. We consider ourselves in the second wave of modernization. Certainly, there are other countries out ahead, but that also does come with benefits as well, because we get to learn from what those other countries did. Yeah, and make sure that we're interoperable with them when we get there as well.
Thank you. So it's always been my belief a good meeting starts on time and ends on time. But I would ask for your indulgence. This is the opening paragraph of the C.D. Howe Institute's report on money in motion. And, all right, I'm a silly Irish girl, but I have a funny way of reading this. Payment systems, like plumbing, do not attract much attention when they are working well. A failure, on the other hand, is a cause for alarm. A broken pipe can flood a basement. Broken payments can disrupt the financial system. Subpar performance, short of a crisis, though less apparent, can also be damaging. Backed up plumbing causes much inconvenience in familiar ways. A strained payment system can also be very costly. The payment systems are the lifeblood of an economy. And although a small share of our gross domestic product, they're important well beyond the size of our means. And so I really want to convey to you, on behalf of Telpay, our gratitude for you spending some time with us today. We would love to see you at our booth. Please complete the survey form. If you have any other questions, the panelists will be here outside for a little bit to answer any specific questions that you have. If I could just ask for your round of applause to thank them for their time, and have a great